This week we're talking Intel in some Windows versus Linux showdowns, and then a new release of LibreOffice. Microsoft open sourced a thing, a new tool this time. Rob has a story about why we don't support bottles, or maybe we do support bottles. You have to listen to find out what's up with that. And oh yeah, it's time to shut down X. It's a lot of fun. Stay tuned.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Hey folks, this is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 183, recorded Saturday, December 21st. 1 degree of Rob. It is Saturday, and you folks know what that means. It's time to get geeky about Linux and open source and hardware and software, all kinds of fun stuff. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and we have a panel. We have some guys. We're going to talk about stuff. We got Rob and David and Jeff. Welcome, guys, to the Untitled Linux Show.
Merry holidays.
Glad to be back.
It is good to have each of you back. And we are actually going to start off with Jeff talking about some Intel news. This one not directly related to their CEO, but related to some hardware that just came out.
Or their chief financial officer, for those keeping up on the news. But, today I'm going to bring a couple stories about Intel. Got to give them a little love somewhere. This first segment, though, we're going to focus on a comparison of the Core Ultra 9 285 Arrow-like processor running on two different operating systems, Windows 11 and Ubuntu 24.10. To be more precise, we're looking at Microsoft Windows 11 Professional 24H2, fully updated with all the latest Windows updates and drivers as of December 15th. And we're comparing this to Ubuntu 24.10 straight out of the box, running Linux kernel 6.11, and with all updates as applied by December 17th. But the story doesn't end there. Michael Arable at Phronix also explored Ubuntu 24.10 with a few key modifications. First, he upgraded the kernel to version 6.12. Then he tested with the 6.13 development kernel. And finally, he ran Ubuntu 24.10 with a 6.13 development kernel. But this time, he switched from the default Intel P-State Power Save Mode governor, ooh, that's a mouthful, to the Intel P-State Performance governor. In the article linked in the show notes, Michael Arable explains his motivation for this comparison is he wanted to examine how both Windows and Linux are handling the P&E cores of this Intel processor. For those who are new to CPUs or perhaps haven't heard this terminology before, P cores stand for performance cores and E cores stand for efficiency cores. And they're literally how they sound. P for higher power, more performance, and E handle the lower level, easier tasks, but more efficiently. Michael was particularly interested in seeing how Linux has matured in its handling of this hardware. And as some of you may recall, and we've discussed this in the podcast in the past, how initial scheduling of tasks between the P&E cores and Linux was a bit problematic. However, that was quite a while ago, and the Linux scheduler has seen significant improvements since then. Because the Core Ultra 9 285K processor is designed as a productivity workhorse rather than a gaming CPU, the benchmarks Michael conducted don't include any games. Instead, he uses a variety of tests focusing on different workloads. These include database sets, Blender renders, audio and video compression, decompression, transcoding, as well as common tasks like zip, file creation, and extraction, which of course involve compression and decompression. These tests are designed to push all the cores of these high-end CPUs, focusing on multi-core utilization rather than single-core performance. So how'd the comparison turn out? Well, I got some bad news. For Windows, congratulations, Microsoft, on coming in last place. Out of 92 benchmarks, Michael ran the stock Ubuntu 24.10 installation, that it was approximately 6% faster than Windows 11. Now, here's where things get interesting, though. Surprisingly, the newer kernels didn't have a significant impact on performance. And even more surprising was the fact that the Intel P-State Performance Governor was actually slower than simply running straight 6.13 kernel. Now, typically a performance governor provides a small performance boost, but that wasn't the case in the testing. I do want to point out that all versions of Ubuntu were actually very close, and some of these fell into probably did. I didn't do the math, but probably fell into the margin of error. I mean, it was really close. The big gap was between Windows and Ubuntu. For the details on each individual benchmarking test, I encourage you to take a look at the article linked in the show notes so you can go through all the details and see all how each test performed and based on your workloads. Because like I said, the 285 is not a gaming CPU. So if you're thinking, I'm going to have cores and gaming, and no, it's strictly productivity. That's it. So take a look, and love to hear feedback.
Yeah, interesting stuff. As you flip, and this is the case every time we look at one of these, when you flip through the individual results, there are some very fascinating standouts. You've got some where it's like the Windows actually wins on one or two tests, and then you've got one here where Windows is running at half speed, almost exactly half speed compared to everything else. There's a lot of them where Ubuntu 24.10 with nothing else is faster than the new kernels, and it's real fascinating.
So with this,
well, I was going to say, I should say this is with a geometric mean that it was 6% faster. So that kind of mathematically takes out some of the flyers.
Yes.
So with this new breaking news that you have here, are you going to be switching then from Windows to Linux?
I plan to. I think about 2011, 2010 is when I plan to switch.
Oh, sorry, I was talking to David.
Oh, guys,
Anyway.
That's brutal. That's brutal.
Might be brutal, but it's fair.
Yes.
Brutal but fair. There's a show title for you.
Yeah. All right. Well, David, since we're on it, let's talk about some software that you can run regardless of which OS you're on, Windows or on Linux.
Absolutely. I have got an article about the fourth maintenance update to 24.8 of the LibreOffice software package. And I picked this article in honor of Ken, since I am covering for him as he is being the real Santa and helping all the Amazon packages get where they need to this Christmas season. And he normally keeps us up to date on LibreOffice. I wanted to pull this story out specifically for him. This being a maintenance update, they addressed a total of 55 bugs. The details are linked in the two change logs, RC1 and RC2, but there are no new features. So it brings stability fixes and some regression fixes. It just improves the function of LibreOffice. The Deb and RPM packages are available for download. Source tarball, of course, is available if you want to compile your software from source. And who doesn't want to do that? You really got to know your nuts and bolts there. And it is getting pushed out to all the repos for the various distros out there. 24.8 was released on August 21st of this year, and there was a big privacy push in that release, and they're just continuing to maintain it. So they do, in their press release for this, they do remind everyone that this is just the community edition, and there are ecosystem partners that offer LibreOffice Enterprise family of applications if you need support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. It's neat to see that coming along, and LibreOffice continuing to be a great product. You run LibreOffice quite a bit, don't you, David?
Mm-hmm.
On Windows.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm a multi-desktop individual, and
he uses Mac OS also.
Yeah.
No, I am anti-Apple. Everybody else I'm okay with. So it was actually a Asahi Linux story that came up this week. They released the spin based off of Fedora 41, and I looked at that and I was like, well, I hate Mac. I'm not going to touch that.
So Microsoft is okay and Apple's not. That's the line. Okay, we see.
Yeah.
I mean,
All
as
right.
far as companies go, I agree. I hate Apple as the company. I don't have an issue these days with Microsoft, but I do have Apple products. I still hate the company.
You were just going to forget the last 20 years. Okay.
Hey, Microsoft. Okay, first off, I'm not a Microsoft apologist, but most of my development is on backend server infrastructure. So, run Linux VMs and Hyper-V and stuff. And I wind up having to support a lot of Windows users. So being familiar with it is valid, or not valid, but is helpful for some of my job stuff. But I also have 2 laptops sitting here that have Kubuntu on them. So I jump around.
Microsoft is just another company full of people, and there's a lot of people that aren't the same today as they were 20 years ago. So
exactly.
Hey, at least on Windows, you can install applications even if they're not available in the Microsoft Store.
Yep.
Going back to the original story, though, one thing I think I need to look at is because I'm really intrigued about how Python's coming into spreadsheet programs more and more. And I know LibreOffice Calc has had it for quite a while, but I need to take a look and see how hard that is. Because for a while, scripting in Python at Calc, now this was probably a few years ago when I last looked at it, was rather hard. I mean, it was kind of one of those, you could do it, but there was multiple steps and hoops you had to jump through to do it. And I'll have to revisit that, see if it, somebody knows if it's easier now to.
Interestingly, I don't do any Python in LibreOffice, but I create Excel files, calc files from Python using other packages. So I go the other way. I haven't done any Python inside.
Well, Excel now is supposed to have Python built in.
Yes.
I don't know which version or when they turned it on, but
you said Excel does?
Lou Moresco.
Yes.
Huh.
He's used to host one of the Twitch shows, the Enterprise Twitch show, and now he's on main Twit occasionally. He's heading up the Python in Excel department, and he's really excited about it. He mentions it every time he's on.
Well, if those work across both those systems, Libre and Office, that would be a very strong reason to go that direction. Because a lot of the other things that one or the other has done weren't cross-compatible.
Oh, and the real power is when you start doing a lot of data analysis, because then you have access to all those Python libraries that, Python's pretty strong in data analysis, as far as languages go. And that's kind of, I'm very involved with data analysis. So I'm like, oh, this would be nice.
Could be quite a powerful choice.
All right, so Rob, you found a fight. You found quite the dust up to talk about here. First off, what is bottles, and then what is the deal with bottles?
So before I get going into the story, I want to thank Sean for donating 10 coffees to the cause for getting me to try Linux Mint for 2 months. I haven't switched to it yet. I'm about the first of the year, and I'll do it for January and February. And I thought there was a second donation, but last time I looked, it wasn't there. So I don't know if I got withdrawn or if I was imagining it. But so I want to thank him because as I get ready to switch over to Linux Mint, this next story suggested maybe it's a good time to move on to something new, as I have been using OpenSUSE for quite a while. And it's been good, but recently there has been some petty bickering between OpenSUSE package maintainers and the upstream developers of bottles. So I have my opinions, but I'll first tell you the story and let you guys see what you think. So bottles is a GUI-based tool to help run Windows software on Linux through the use of Wine. And, it's similar to like Lutris or Play on Linux, other things that just make it easy, a good front end to make it easy for you. The The developers have designed bottle software to work in a sandboxed environment like Flatpaks, and say the official supported packages for bottles is the ones in the Arch AUR and FlatHub. So because of this architecture, packaging and running unsandbox often causes issues that leads to bugs and problems that end users then often overwhelm the bottles developers with these bug reports and issues that are often caused by how the downstream package manager packaged the bottles and distributed it. A letter back in 2022 titled "Please don't unofficially ship bottles in distribution repositories" outlined this and offered help to package managers, saying, "Our invitation is addressed to all those who are packaging bottles incorrectly and or do not provide adequate tests, thus invalidating the user experience. We are happy to help anyone who would like to keep their package, adapting it to our quality standards, i.e. making the application work as intended." So that was a couple of years ago, that this open letter saying what's officially supported. If you want to package it, let us help you so it can be packaged correctly and work and not cause all these tickets to come upstream to us. About 2 weeks ago, a patch was applied to bottles. So I guess bottles was kind of tired of all these downstream problems coming back to them. And the patch is to exit the program if not being ran in a sandboxed environment. So this essentially blocks downstream package managers from packaging the software without removing that bit of code first. Well, this led to a lot of arguing on the pull request, calling the software no longer free and open source. And the package manager packaging bottles for OpenSUSE, they took their own approach. They took this into their own hands, as they made their own modifications, removing the upstream patch that stops bottles from running. That's fine. Stops it from running outside of a sandboxed environment. And then also adding their own patch that removed the bottle's donation button with a patch file called don't support.patch file. Now, for some of my opinions, bottles is designed a certain way to work best with sandbox environments. That's how they created it. And it's hard to improve a product when downstream providers package in a way that causes bugs, and then instead of supporting those bugs themselves that they kind of created, they get pushed upstream to the developers. So then only supporting officially packaged setups makes perfect sense to me. Package maintainers taking advantage. They're taking advantage of this upstream code. It's like, yeah, we're going to use your code and put it in our distribution, for their own distribution, and then removing things like the upstream donation button. They need to eat. We often talk about needing money and being able to support themselves and pay their bills, and they're removing that, but they're not like taking on that support role for packaging. It's all legal, sure, because it's open source, but it is awfully sketchy. And, there are distros like Fedora that I think took a much better path. They changed the code that kills the software when not ran in a sandbox. And they changed it to a warning saying that, I don't remember exactly what it is, but basically, this is not an official package. Be careful. But I believe I also saw that support links for Fedora are also directed to go to Fedora. So if you have an issue with the Fedora package, come to Fedora, come to our community, will help you out. Obviously, if Fedora developers, package maintainers yeah, this is an upstream issue, I'm sure it'll get sent up. But when I have a problem with software, I first contact my vendor, and then if they can't solve it, they contact their vendor. Which eventually gets back to the developers. I don't go all the way, skip all the chains. So you should follow the chains of support. Other package maintainers on Reddit have said they follow the request of the devs, and some have said if you don't want to package it as requested or support what you package, maybe stop packaging it. It's already available on Flatpak or FlatHub, which you can get on pretty much any Linux system out there. If that's the official way it's supported, there's not really a need to repackage it another way.
I find it interesting. So I in looking through this, my first thought was, well, are there any distros that package this with the sandboxing? And I don't think so. I think what they're actually doing is what the patch does is it checks whether it's running as a Flatpak, right?
Yeah, I think pretty much.
Yeah. So it's they intentionally added a patch to make the thing difficult to package, right? And that's interesting.
But it also comes after years of having problems with downstream package maintainers. So
right.
Having to sort through all the bug reports that shouldn't be getting because of the downstream.
Which then distracts them from actually making real improvements to their officially supported channels and products. And that simple patch, for a developer or maintainer, I'm sure it's rather easy to just comment that out from what I saw and move on if you really want to do it in an unsupported method.
And I think Fedora did it right. You know what? We're doing this. It's not fully supported, but we're taking it upon ourselves to handle the support of this. So we're not bothering the original developers, and we're going to take the brunt because we're doing something that's not officially supported.
Apparently, the Fedora patch has a problem, though. It's got a little checkbox to not show this again, and that doesn't actually do anything. Whoops.
Side note, too, this bottles is not Codeweaver bottles. Because when you first were talking about this, I thought this was Codeweavers, and I was looking at the article, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is not Codeweavers, because they also have bottles.
Yeah, it's its own thing. It is its own application. Yeah, it's interesting. You have some if you actually go to the pull request in the bottles GitHub, you've got somebody trying to argue that this makes it not open source software, which is not true. I understand the point that Tim77 is making, but he is incorrect and does not understand how open source licensing works.
Yeah, I don't even think it does anything to the spirit of it, really.
No.
I mean, at worst, you could argue it's bad coding. It's still open source. It won't run. Well, that's just bad code. That's not. Doesn't mean you can't see it.
Yeah. It does bring about an interesting question, though, and I know what the answer is, but if you were to say, well, I want to write a piece of software, I want to write a piece of software, and I don't want Fedora to ever package it. I do not want this to be in the Fedora packages. The text of the GPL, the text of any OSI approved license, really, so anything we would call open source, you basically can't do that. You cannot exclude one of the distros from being able to package your software.
Right.
And so on the one hand, you may just kind of think about that and go, oh, well, it makes sense that you would want your software, if somebody wrote software and really didn't want it to be in Fedora, shouldn't they be able to do that? And so on one hand, I mean, yes, you could write a license like that, but it would not be open source. And the reason is because if you could say, I don't want this in Fedora, you could, by the same sort of legal strategy, say, I don't want anyone in the country of Germany England, whatever, to be able to use this software. And then I think it becomes a little bit more apparent why that's problematic. And that's a road that just gets worse and messier the further we go down it. So there is a reason that open source software is available to be run by anyone the way that it is.
This does make.
Go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say this does make me wonder. I've tried bottles, I don't know, a couple years ago, and it didn't work very well for me at all. And I don't know if I don't remember now if the one I used was an unofficial package, and maybe that is why I had a very bad experience with it. So it really makes me think I have to try it again with an insurance, an officially supported package.
Indeed.
Well, and it's almost like a kind of a test too. If you have just a little patch in there and it stops it from running, it's like if you can't easily go in and remove that, if you're repackaging this for a distribution, you probably shouldn't be messing with it. I would think somebody at that level, well, really, because somebody at that level, I would think would just, this would be like, oh yeah, done, and they're not going to spend a minute on this and, we'll recompile, we'll do this, it's done.
Recompile, do the thing, ship it out, don't worry about it again. It's like, yeah, if you can't at least do that, and you probably can't support it either.
Yeah. So there is one more thing that I will mention here, and that's because we have somebody in the chat room said, doesn't it just mean that if the source code is available to the public, it's open source? And no, that's what's called source available, and that is different from open source. And the reason that we have that distinction is you've got some companies out there. I think Terraform was one of them. There's been a couple of big database pieces of software that have added clauses to their licensing that basically says you cannot sell this commercially. And again, that is not an OSI approved license, right? So you've got the open source group, OSI, open source
initiative,
something like probably initiative. Anyway, that's the group that sort of handles the open source licensing right now. And back when the term open source really became solidified, what it means in the software world, the people that worked on that, they came up with some things that it's like it's got to have, for a license to be considered open source, it's got to have this. And no restrictions on use was one of the things that it absolutely had to have. And, in addition to that and sort of tied to it, it's like there cannot be a morality clause and be considered open source. So you can't come along and say, I don't want, and here's the reason why, is because nobody can agree on morality, right? So you can't come along and say, I don't want anyone of this religious group to be able to use my software, or I don't want anyone in this business venture to be able to use my software, because, some people would consider the manufacture of alcohol to be morally problematic, and other people think that that's a ridiculous argument. People do not agree on that, and that's one of the reasons why in the open source definition, you're not allowed to include that sort of morality statement in your license.
This summer we talked about a similar issue with Winamp open sourcing, and they didn't open source. They said you can help us. It's you can view it, you can help us, but you can't do anything with it.
Yes, they made it source available.
Yeah,
I was going to say that very same example. That's the first thing I thought of.
Yes. All right. Well, we have whipped that one to death.
Well, David works with a lot of closed source stuff. What's your opinion?
I was still trying to figure out. When you said OSI, I was thinking Open Systems Interconnection, which makes the OSI model of networking. And then that made me think about how we say DRM all the time, which is digital rights management, or something to do with memory. And I was just like, there's too many acronyms. So I'm sorry. No, I prefer open source licensing and software. And I apologize to everyone very humbly that I'm using Windows.
All right, Jeff, let's talk about something Arch is doing. And Yeah, what is it's another Intel story, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, we're giving Intel a little love today. Like I said, they're taking quite the beating recently, but so this ties in with the first story I had, and I was actually going to make it one segment in the show, but I kind of hit a couple pages and I thought, this probably is too much for one segment, so I'm just going to make it into two stories. So now this is also about the Intel 285 processor, just like the last story. But now we're going to shift our focus to comparing various Linux distributions to see which performs best on the Intel 285 processor. Now, Michael Arable still included all the Ubuntu 24.10 variants that I mentioned earlier, with the different kernel versions, the performance governor version, all that. It's still in there, but they've added some new contenders. So Fedora Workstation 41. We have an old favorite, and that a lot of people know, Clear Linux version 42790. Historically, it's been a speed champion. We've got Arch Linux in there because I know a lot of people have been asking Michael Arable to include Arch in a lot of stuff, and Cashy OS. Now, most of you probably are familiar with many of these distributions, but Cashy OS might be new to some. I know I wasn't really up on it, so I looked it up, and it's basically a distribution specifically designed for speed and stability, and it's based on Arch. So the benchmarks that were used today are largely the same workload-focused tests that we discussed in the first story. So there's no gaming benchmarks. This is all production-style benchmarks, and it might be almost the identical run. If not, there's a huge overlap. That Venn diagram really overlaps a lot. And, the results I think you find are quite surprising. The lowest performer was Fedora Workstation 41. Next up, a little bit faster, was stock Ubuntu 24.10. Now, those two were close enough that the difference could be within a margin of error. I mean, it just... even if there's statistically a difference, realistically there's not. It's too close to even notice. But then came Clear Linux, just slightly faster than out of the box Ubuntu. And following, still going up the ladder was Ubuntu 24.10 with the 6.13 kernel and the performance governor. Faster still was Ubuntu 24.10 with just the plain 6.13 kernel and the stock governor. Arch Linux edged that out in that configuration by a small margin, and at the very top spot was Cashy OS. Now, if you've been looking at Foronics for a long time, if you've been listening to this show, Clear Linux usually comes out on top, and often by a noticeable margin. It's kind of the performance juggernaut and kind of has been the benchmark for a long time. So to see it in the middle of the pack was quite a surprise. Now, it's important to keep in mind, though, that the results were close enough that even the slowest to fastest day-to-day use, unless you're specifically looking at timing benchmarks, you're really not going to see a difference. It's still just a few percentage points. So it's not like, holy cow, this is a lot faster. It's going to be just very minimal. But, it's interesting that, Clear Linux, which is known for tuning and things like that of performance workloads, and it's not really meant to be a user-friendly distribution. I mean, you can run it, but it's geared towards more enterprise and tuned for Intel processors. But take a look at the second article take a look at the article in the show notes, the second article on Intel, for the full breakdown of benchmarks. Because again, there's going to be certain ones that one distribution runs away, and then there's another one where it's way behind, and but so this is again geographic mean or geometric mean, but to remove the flyers. But overall, Cashy OS was number one. And on a personal note, when I was looking at it, I see that it runs KDE in their desktop variant. So if I was going to jump from Kubuntu, that could be a real contender. just totally go away from something I know. I ran Debian for a long time. I've been in the Fedora. I've ran some Fedora stuff over the years. This would be totally new. So maybe, time will tell, but maybe this will be, if I'm going to jump to something, maybe Cachy's my new OS in the future.
There's also news out today that you haven't touched on about Cachy OS, is that they've changed and optimized their kernel even further. It's now being built using a compiler Auto FDO. And so I don't think he's done any benchmarks on it yet now that they've changed this, but it may be even faster.
It could be, but now in kind of the devil's counterpoint here, Ubuntu on 25.04 is also now supposed to compile with the 03 option and have some performance enhancements in it as well. So people are really starting to be a little more aggressive on the performance on Linux all over, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the other things that came to my mind reading through this is that Torvalds in the past month has come out against the micro architecture versioning for x86-64, the whole V1, V2, V3, V4. There's an article on Phoronix like December 4th or 5th, and he comes out and says, this is really dumb, and we are not introducing this into the kernel because, and this is absolutely correct, it's not as linear. This is taking CPU capabilities and trying to make them linear when they are not linear. And obviously we've seen that because Intel is now shipping new CPUs that don't have the AVX 512, so they're still stuck on x86-64 V3. So I get why a distro like Cachy or Fedora or what have you would want to be able to do that and say, well, we're just going to, starting with this version, we're going to compile against this new, microarchitecture version. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily work in the real world when the two major manufacturers don't agree on which features and functionality is absolutely required for new designs.
Yeah, it's definitely a generalization, but on the flip side, the compilers, that's how they're classifying some of this stuff.
Yep.
So, I mean, Torvalds can say whatever he wants, but if, Clang and GCC are going, well, here's how we're doing it,
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose it's fair, though, to say that, like, the kernel does not necessarily need to have any of that. It doesn't necessarily have to be aware of that. It can still use the old way of doing it. Like, it's GCC will sort of magically make that work, and the kernel doesn't have to care.
Yeah, well, like 512 instruction set. So even this brand new 285 processor does not support 512 instructions natively. Now they get around it with software and whatnot.
Yeah,
but it's not like AMD. So, but that's, I believe, handled all in the compiler, not the kernel itself.
Yep, that's fair.
But you're getting into my gray area here. So if somebody knows better, let me know.
All right. Well, let's talk about a Microsoft release. Is this open source software? It's a new Python tool. I think David's got the scoop.
Yeah. Before we jump into that, though, I have just one quick question. How many coffees is it going to take to get you on Cachy OS?
Well, I have to get through the Linux Mint challenge first, and hopefully I have time before the Cosmic, Pop! OS Cosmic new Cosmic desktop is fully out. But, I guess another 10 coffees.
We're charting Rob's distro hopping for him, like 3 or 4 hops away now.
And I think Rob needs to go into March a little bit because I think he's trying to shortchange somebody by doing it in February, so he's a few days shorter.
Okay, I just had to ask.
We'll give those. Well, I'll add those days on there.
I'm always looking at the data.
I saw several news articles pop up over the last week about a new Python tool that Microsoft has released on GitHub as open source. I linked to NeoWin because I like to spread the love around. Didn't pick them out specifically, but this is a news article by Pradeep Vishwanathan. And Microsoft releases a new Python tool for converting files and Office documents to Markdown. So if you do any code development, most of the readmes and stuff, or even if you don't do any development yourself, but you're clicking through to the source code repositories on your open source projects, most of the readmes and stuff that you see are written in Markdown, and they have an MD extension. So the focus of this release is all about leveraging large language models and AI. But I think that there may be some opportunities here for people that just need to convert stuff into Markdown, not specifically for the AI side. But their focus is on converting PDFs, PowerPoints, Word documents, Excel, images, audio, HTML, and various other text-based formats into Markdown. This is a Python library, and there's some examples of how to import it and use it. One of the interesting things that you can do with it is if you have a large language, if you have access to a large language model, you can actually connect it to Markdown and use it to describe images into Markdown. So you can connect it to a large language model. In their example, they're connecting it to ChatGPT 4.0, and then you convert an image, and it's going to give you text describing that image, which image description is actually one of the things that the LLMs seem to be getting pretty good at. So that's pretty cool. It is open source, and it is super fast. It's easy to use, and it's something fun to play around with.
I'm immediately struck by a need. I need to do some playing around with taking an image, asking LLM to give me a description, and then feeding that description back into LLM and seeing what it gives me.
That could be fun.
Yes. That's kind of like you take a recipe and you translate it back and forth from Chinese and English several times through machine translation, and you try to figure out what it is at the end of it. I feel like your images would be very similar.
Or that's one of those tricks from college where you don't want to get dinged for plagiarism, so you take content and you translate it several times and then back into English.
Wow. We do not condone any such shenanigans.
Thanks for the tip. I am considering some new classes next fall. So
the previous discussion was for entertainment purposes only, and not to be actually used for actual academic.
It was something I had to be aware of when I was a part-time instructor at a local community college.
There you go. There you go.
Now, when I went to college myself, it was well before the advent of easy translation services. So
okay, but even if you are aware of it, what can you really do?
There are some different places out there that are trying to offer, like, is this written by LLM detection technology? So you could feasibly try to get the same thing for, is this translated by a machine?
Yeah, but is that a thing yet?
But yeah, from an instructor standpoint, you basically just kind of have to be aware if the product of work you're getting from a student suddenly seems more impressive than the student has been up to that point.
That's always a thing, though, even before LLM.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. I do notice, talking about the market down, the library itself. It supports PowerPoint. It supports Word. It supports Excel. No LibreOffice formats. I was a little disappointed. Maybe they'll take a pull request.
Well, I thought all those Microsoft formats were supposed to be open source. That's what the brochure said.
They're sort of open in a way.
Yes. No, I know the reality of it.
All right. Rob, you want to talk about the thing that we disappointed you by not talking about last week?
I think you probably disappointed Ken more than me. So this is going to be another episode of something Ken should buy. So if you're listening, Ken, which I know you are, I've seen you in the Discord, this one's for you. Because here is your next PC. So I can't remember if we talked about the the Raspberry Pi 500 being released. I know we have fans, many fans in our panel and users out there of the Raspberry Pi 400. And the Pi 500 is much the same, but improved with the Raspberry Pi 5 architecture and 8 gigabits of RAM. The position of the GPIO header and 3x USB-A ports swapped over, and the location of the USB-C power ports moved. They're the same ones as before in the 400, just a different order, and all this is available for $90 from CanaKit. It's actually there. I looked at it today. I really thought about clicking the buy button, but I didn't think I could get it to Ken in time, so maybe next year. But this isn't the big reveal. We all knew the Pi 500 was coming. We knew it would be great. It's the Pi 400 with the Pi 5. But what nobody speculated on was the official Raspberry Pi monitor. There are many portable monitors out there. I have one myself for traveling. But for Pi fans like you and me, this one is designed for you. It's designed for Pi fans. The specs comes with a 15.6 inch IPS LCD display with anti-glare, 1920 by 1080 at 60 hertz, max brightness of 250 nits, 45% color gamut, 80-degree viewing angle, full-size HDMI port, front-facing stereo speakers, has two 1x2 watts, so don't expect a whole lot from that. And courage. It has the courage to add a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. The courage that Apple has lost years ago, and Samsung and all those makers. But Raspberry Pi Foundation keeps that courage going on.
It's hilarious.
It also has the physical buttons for volume, brightness, and power. Has mounting options, including a kickstand. The portable monitor display I have does not have a kickstand. It has this just a cover that doesn't even stick to it, just kind of fits over the top. And if you fold it upright, you can kind of sit in there, but it doesn't hold it up that great. So kickstand would be a great option. Or it also has a standard VESA mount, so you can mount it to anything, an arm, a desktop mount, or whatever. VESA is the standard mount that is on almost all monitors. This monitor is powered by a 1.5 amp 5 volt USB-C, powered with you can power with a dedicated power supply or through a USB-A to Type-C cable, powered directly by a USB port on the Raspberry Pi, or another device such as a monitor, with the one limitation, or I guess two limitations, that the brightness is limited to 60% and volume to 50% when the monitor is powered by a USB port. And all this just a little bit more than the Pi 500 itself, $100. So you get the Pi 500, you get the monitor, $190 plus tax and whatever shipping other fees are in there. There you got your full computer right there, and perfect for Ken.
So I've seen a couple of complaints about the monitor. One complaint in particular about the monitor, and that is that the ports are behind the VESA mount. So if you have anything connected to the VESA mount, you really can't get to the ports on the monitor, which is not that big of a deal, I don't think, because once you have it mounted up with your VESA mount, do you really need to be getting to the ports to unplug and plug things in? But this is a complaint.
Is it saying that you can't get to them, or are they blocked where it can't be used?
I think you just can't get to them. I think you can still have things plugged in because of the way it
enough of a indent or whatever, so that way you could still get them in behind whatever base plate you have there.
Yeah, so your ports on this thing, you're looking at your monitor. They actually plug in sideways. There's a well, so the cables run in and plug in sideways. You cannot get to it because that well is directly underneath the VESA mount. So that is one complaint I've seen people have. I sort of have another complaint, and that is that none of this stuff supports USB-C alt mode. And when you talk about a portable monitor, that seems to me to be like the killer feature that you really would like to have. So I would have loved to have seen the ability to just put the whole thing on USB-C and get, HDMI over USB-C or one of the other. I don't remember if USB-C alt mode is HDMI or if it's DVI. Anyway,
Display.
So you can't just have a single cable even.
I don't think so. I've not seen anywhere in the specs that it supports it. Even if you could, though, I don't think any of the Raspberry Pis support that. I don't think there's a Raspberry Pi that has USB-C.
Right, because it said it's USB-A to USB-C.
Yeah.
Oh, that is disappointing.
So it's not quite as cool as it seems. Now you can do it with two cables. So it's still usable. It's just not like a top of the line portable monitor. Right. And so this is something else I would actually like to see on a future Raspberry Pi is a fully featured USB-C port that can do power delivery out. That this is something that I know is sort of niche, but I would love to see power delivery out from Raspberry Pi.
So you can have out and the display all in one cable, or
that's what. Yeah. So on a laptop, there's USB-C ports. You can do that. It'll do USB-C power out, and it'll do alt modes that you can just have a single cable to run your display.
But you got the Pi having the out.
I would love to see the Raspberry Pi 6 have a fully featured USB-C port on it.
I thought you meant the display, so you could daisy chain them.
Would beefing up the components and board to support the power out increase cost significantly?
Oh, I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure. Right, and so that's why they haven't done this, and that actually leads nicely into, if we're talking about the Raspberry Pi 500 as well, the big disappointment that everybody has with the Pi 500, and that is that it's got an NVMe port on the motherboard, but none of the components populated to actually make the thing work. So, the traces are there, but there's just no NVMe header, and there's a couple of, let's see, there's the header itself to actually physically be able to plug something in. There are two little tiny surface mount capacitors, and then a 3.3 volt power supply. That is what is missing to be able to get an NVMe port on the Pi 500, and the fact that the case. So the actual plastic case, the bottom of it, there's no flap there to be able to get to it, right? There's a couple of other really interesting things. Jeff Geerling was the one that really tore the 500 apart and looked at this. There's also a place that seems to be for power over Ethernet, which is also very, very interesting. That the Raspberry Pi Foundation was thinking about Pi 500 with power over Ethernet, and so these are two, for certain people, for me, for some of us, these are really, really cool features that we didn't get that, we would love to have. And I'm pretty sure what we're seeing here is it's just, there's going to be a Pi 500 Pro, right? It's almost inevitably coming. And the reason they didn't just make these things standard is it would increase the price, right? So they wouldn't be able to sell it for $90. They'd have to sell it for, I don't know, 105, 110, something like that when you talk about adding all these different things to it. So
yeah, the circuit board to increase the power wouldn't be that much. I mean, you'd have to beef your traces a little, but cost wise, it wouldn't be terrible. It'd be more the components you'd have to add and any so licensing that goes with that.
Right. So with the Pi 500, the actual keyboard, the traces are there. It is on the board itself. They literally have the traces there. In fact, there's a Hackaday article, we cover this, where someone sourced the components and made the NVMe slot work.
Huh.
It's just there's 4 different components you have to add to it, at least 4, maybe even more than that, with some resistors on there. But again, it's gonna increase the bill of materials, which is going to increase the cost of it. And they were hoping to keep probably a sub $100 price point is what they wanted to hit. And you start adding a bunch of things to it, and it's going to be over that. So all of that to say, the Pi 500 itself, yes, on a CPU side, it's an upgrade, but it doesn't have enough of the killer features for me. I'm not ordering a Pi 500. I'm holding out for the Pi 500 Pro, Pi 550. I don't know what they're going to call it. Pi 500 XL. That's the one that I'm waiting for.
Well,
Yeah, that
the
would be
XL
cool.
will include base amounts. So.
I hope so. I legitimately hope so. I asked Evan. I interviewed him and I asked him. I said, "Bennett, we need the VESA mounts on the Pi 500." I was disappointed to not see it. I'm hoping it's coming on the Pro model.
Where you'd mount a monitor directly to the
it doesn't necessarily have to be VESA, but I've just thought for the longest time that it would be nice to have on the bottom of the Pi 500 keyboard. So, your Pi 500, it's a keyboard.
Pretty much.
You mount it to things. It would be nice to have a couple of certs in there, whether it be the VESA mounting pattern or not, just a couple of places in there to be able to actually bolt something to it, to be able to mount
you could
it.
put it on a swing arm then, just like the monitor.
Exactly. You know how cool that would be to be able to have a Pi 500 on a swing arm connected to a Raspberry Pi monitor also on a swing arm? That would be cool.
I could see some use cases there.
Mm-hmm.
First, I was just kind of looking too, when you're adding components to a Pi, there's some NUCs that get kind of cheap in there too. And at some point you're going to, cross over depending on how much you throw into it. And you kind of then going, well, I can have a low end PC for what?
Yep.
And that the advantage of the NUC is it comes with a Windows license.
The one I was looking at, I don't know as it did.
It may or may not be a legitimate Windows license, but it may have Windows installed on it. Sure. Yeah. I don't know that I would trust that install of Windows, but it's probably on there. Yeah. No, that's it. The other thing you have to think about too is that Raspberry Pi Foundation, they're very much still thinking about the educational side of things. And so one of their main focuses is they're making these computers for education. And so trying to keep the costs down for that is a big deal for them too. So it does not bother me that they made the Pi 500 and that they made it with the reduced feature set. The thing that annoys me the most is that there wasn't also an announcement that something more was coming.
Well, think of it this way too. Here's a heck of a electrical technician trainer. Okay, in today's class, we're going to get the parts and we're going to surface mount parts onto this, and we're going to make this thing, the NVMe work, and we're going to make the PoE work. And
those coupling capacitors are so tiny. They are very small.
There's your educational focus you're looking for.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
There's people that I've got buddies that they solder under microscopes.
Yep.
I mean, that's kind of what you have to do now. The old days, the big old spool, and that's
if you got the skills for that, you might as well just go be a surgeon and make lots of money.
Yeah, but if you pop a capacitor, you're not.
Your downside's a lot higher.
Yeah.
I suspect that the guys that can do that with the soldering irons actually make more than the surgeons do in some cases.
I don't know about that, but they're making good money.
Yeah.
I will say that.
Believe it or not, in a lot of cases, boy, this is totally off topic. In a lot of cases, though, most of that money, you spend $100,000 for a surgery. Most of that goes towards the hospital and not the actual surgeon. So anyway, let's move along to something more technical related.
Before we move along, I have a little bit of hardware. It wasn't enough to make a story, kind of a side note, but I would love to hear if anybody has an experience on it. But I'm kind of looking at the Flint 2 Wi-Fi 6 router. It's from GL iNet, I guess is how you say it. Mm-hmm. And it basically runs OpenWRT. They have a kind of a customized version, but I was doing some research and you can go between the generic OpenWRT and their little customized version easily back and forth. It's pretty close to stock OpenWRT, and it's just new Wi-Fi router that's basically built to run.
You might also consider the OpenWRT1.
Yeah.
If you can get it. Now, I don't think Amazon has it locally yet, so it's still AliExpress. But those are a couple of the really impressive ones right now. I've used GLINet before, and they make good products as well.
Yeah. So it's seems pretty open source friendly if they're using OpenWRT. So they're, some nice hardware, and it comes with the Wi-Fi where the one doesn't. Really, I mean, it's not the.
You can get it with Wi-Fi. The big downside of the OpenWRT1 is that it only has a single 2.5 gig port, whereas the Flint, I think, has at least two of them.
I think it's 10 gigs, and it's got several networking ports on it. There's two 2.5 gigs, and there's 4 1 gigs.
Yeah,
and it supports Wi-Fi 6.
Yeah, that is
so it's kind of the step up from the one.
Yeah, it's cool.
Well, the price isn't bad for all that either.
Yeah,
no,
it's really good.
Yeah, so there's just more hardware out there that we might be purchasing.
So Jeff, you jumped in to tell us about hardware right before it was time to hand it back over to you to tell us about hardware.
I'm seeing a theme with me. So laptops, and I bring this up every once in a while. I kind of keep watching them evolve, and kind of exciting. Well, my last segment here is about a review that someone did on the Framework 13 AMD laptop on Linux. So, we often discuss the Framework laptops on this podcast, but I found this particular review quite unique. Not only does it focus on the AMD 7040U processor, which is a new processor from AMD for mobile, laptops and whatnot, but it's also takes a gaming and Linux-centric approach. And it goes beyond the simple listing hardware specs and delves into the actual user experience and impressions of Linux on this machine. Now, the review does cover some of the hardware improvements, such as a better screen. Now it's got a 2880 by 1920 resolution and a 144 hertz refresh rate. And the reviewer also mentions an improved hinge compared to older generations of the laptop. And there's other enhancements that you can read about in the article, but they've had the previous generation, this one, so they can kind of compare and contrast the changes that Framework is still making to their product. But what we're most interested in here is the Linux experience. Now, the author describes installing Ubuntu 2404 on the laptop and noting that they aren't a typical Ubuntu user. I mean, and they even provide instructions on how to completely remove snap packages from the distribution and prevent them from being installed again, but that's not the main focus of the story. But there's a bit of a rant in there about snap packages. It's just one little paragraph, so it's not huge. But the review includes benchmarks comparing this 13th generation framework to an Intel 12th generational model. And the AMD system performs very well and is noticeably faster than the Intel system. And the Intel had a Core i7 1260p CPU, and both CPUs have 16 threads. The Intel does have some P and E cores, so there's some of the E cores don't have hyper-threading where the Ps do, but bottom line, they both can take 16 threads. The author also discusses battery life, and while it's generally good, they point out that sleep mode isn't working perfectly in Linux. They said closing the laptop at 9 p.m. and opening it again at 9 a.m. results in a 5 to 10% battery drain. However, they also mentioned that the battery is larger on this model, so it's not as significant of an issue as it was on the previous version. Interestingly, the older Intel version had issues with gaming because the drivers weren't mature enough and some games failed to launch. But the author is very enthusiastic about the AMD version's gaming capabilities. Not only can it launch games, but it also plays them very well, even without a dedicated GPU. To quote the author, the 7840U APU, that's the graphics part of this chip, is a beast. The author is happy with the laptop after 2 to 3 months of use, which gives this review more depth than the typical I used it for a week review. So, they do mention a few minor issues, but nothing show stopping. So it's pretty detailed, having used it for that long. They really got the ins and outs of it. I appreciate the article not only for its detailed analysis, but for its comparison between this year's model and last year's model. And I highly recommend checking out the article linked in the show notes for a thorough review of both the hardware and software experience. But bottom line, it was really good. And he loves this laptop and thinks it's a lot better than the previous years.
Yeah. So I bought a Framework 16 for my dad. He had a job change and had a work laptop, needed to get something. And so he went to me, he goes, "Can you build me a laptop?" I'm like, "Well, actually, I can, if we go with this one company." So we did a framework for him. And so I got to play with it a little bit, getting it set up for him. And I was quite impressed with the 16. And so I've got an AMD Framework 13 on my wish list. So if someone wants to donate to me $1,644 worth of coffee plus tax, I'll have to work that out later, exactly what that ends up being. A lot of coffee.
But you say what, 1,600?
So it's 1644 is the Framework 13 as I would want it set up. Yeah.
So 200 something.
Yeah.
329 coffees.
There you go. That's a bunch of coffees. He did the math.
I did the math.
But anyway, yeah, I'm a huge fan of the framework. Something I've been thinking about here recently is doing some custom 3D printed framework modules to go into the slots. There's some fun ideas I have for that.
Now, to truly review though, I think you also need to get a System 76 laptop so you can compare and contrast them, and the newest model of both companies.
Yeah. The 76, they just released a one based on the Ryzen 9. I saw that article come across my feed, and I can't put my fingers on it right now, but it looked impressive.
Yeah, so as soon as you can find a sponsor to take care of the cost on that, I will be glad to pick up those laptops and review them for you.
Well, I think safely, if someone can donate about 700 coffees, I think then we'll be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's quadruple that and get one for all of us.
There you go.
Well, that would be 2 for all of us.
Well, right.
So if we had a good 12, well, probably 1,300 coffees, we could each get one. Spare change for some people,
Yeah. Yeah. There are probably more cost-effective ways to do that rather than going through Buy Me a Coffee. Anyway, oh my goodness. We are so far off the path now. Let's talk about jumbo data packets. Ooh, interesting stuff happening in the Linux network stack.
Yes. So in let's see. The patches have been merged to next-net.get, making it material for the networking code in the next kernel merge window, which is Linux 6.14, and it should be opening up late January. But with that context, what we're looking at is jumbo data packet transmission and rack-tlp coming to Linux. The jumbo data packet transmission is code. So David Howells of Red Hat has been working to implement this, and it is code to enhance the ability to send UDP packets that are significantly larger than the default MTU of 1412 bytes. MTU is maximum transmission unit, and it is a number that tells networking equipment how large a packet of data they can transmit at one time between endpoints. The MTU can actually fluctuate because depending on the path you're going over, some networks may be able to handle jumbo frames and some may not. And so that's where you get packet fragmentation and things, which is where they have to break up a packet to get it across a segment of the network that doesn't have, has smaller MTU sizes, and then reassemble it. But some of the things that he mentions is an MTU of 8,192 would allow 5 of the standard 1412 UDP packets to be transmitted as one. And then you also have the issue, and he said, an alternative and possibly more efficient way would be to be able to expand and shrink the capacity of each data packet to match the MTU and thus save on header and tail gap overhead. Tail gap is where your packet is smaller than the maximum MTU, but because it's smaller, you still have to fill up that full size of the MTU. And he mentioned specifically that IPv6 over Wi-Fi the MTU is smaller even than the standard 1412. And I haven't looked into it, but I would assume that's because the header information for IPv6 with the larger address fields would be taking up more of that 1412 maximum capacity.
Yep. The
other interesting thing that he talks about is rack-tlp. And rack-tlp is an enhancement to the TCP/IP acknowledgement process, taking advantage of. So the original ACK process is where the server sends a whole bunch of packets, then the client, when it gets the packets and it's reassembled them, it acknowledges them. It sends an ACK back. And then the server waits for that ACK for a certain amount of time. And if it doesn't get it, it goes, oh, they must not have got it. So it resends it again. Well, if the timing is off, if some of the packets didn't arrive or they arrived out of order and the reassembly didn't happen quickly enough, you can get into situations where you're retransmitting data that was actually received, and then that's just adding to congestion. So an enhancement that they made to it a while back was called a SAC, or selective acknowledgement, and that's where you can acknowledge specific parts of the entire window of data that you're supposed to receive so that you can say, hey, I got these three, but not those two. And then Rack builds on that with some timing, some dynamic timing. So basically, it's constantly monitoring the transmissions and the ACKs it's getting, the SACs it's getting back to see how long it's actually taking. And each time it gets a selective acknowledgement back, it adjusts that timer so that it has the actual time plus a buffer. So that it's not wasting time on resending, but it's also not just resending stuff without knowing that it didn't get there. And if you click through to the RFC that's linked, which RFC is request for comment, and is how pretty much all of the standards that operate networks and the internet are developed in the open, they actually go through an example in there of how that can look where you're having multiple losses, but it just brings a lot of efficiency. And then the rack-TLP, the TLP is tail loss probe, and that is where at the tail end of a network communication or conversation, you can wind up not sending as much data because maybe there's not as much to go. And so you get a situation where you don't have this windowing information. So it can actually intentionally send packets just looking for acknowledgments just to be able to rebuild that windowing information. So anyway, these two enhancements being built in, they've already been developed and they're being implemented in network equipment and stuff, but having them here in the operating system is just going to make for more efficient networking moving forward, which is always a good thing.
Interesting stuff. A lot of that doesn't have a whole lot of use case for small networks. It's more like big iron stuff where we've got like 10 gig backends and you want to be able to just smash as much traffic as possible through there. And but it makes a lot of sense for that.
But a lot of that rack-TLP stuff is where you've got like your data centers with that 10 gig, but then you're sending it out over the internet. So you need to be able to adjust your MTUs and stuff on the fly so that you're not using your 10 gig to crush your internet connection or 2 or 3 ISPs out.
Yep. Yeah, neat stuff. And of course, you see these things, they'll land in the kernel, they'll get used in data centers. And the next thing you know, somebody will have some implementation in a router that makes use of some of it in one way or another. Right. Yep. So it does sort of trickle down, as it were, to our equipment eventually. All right. Rob, is this a political statement about a certain social network?
Yes, it is time to get rid of X. No, I'm not talking about Twitter. I'm talking about X11 or X.org or, whatever name you want to call it this decade. The X that was X long before Twitter. And that's why you don't name your company a name that's already taken. Whenever I've started a company, I usually Google first. It's like, anybody got this? No? All right, I'll take it then. But, usually the first 100 names I pick are already taken. And so
company names are just like email addresses. All the good ones are taken.
Yeah. So I don't take, X. Come on. Anyway, I'm talking about another X that is also circling the drain, as one of the last major desktop environments has finally implemented Wayland as an experimental feature. And that desktop environment is XFCE, the desktop long known for being slow to change but stable as a rock, has released XFCE version 4.20, and only 2 years since their last release of 4.18. But for once, it's kind of packed with new features. And the biggest new features is experimental Wayland support that can be started with a simple start XFCE4 -Wayland. However, it's still super early with several XFCE components that aren't going to work yet, such as XFWM for the window manager, XF dashboard, XFCE4 screensaver. Who needs a screensaver these days? XFCE4 window CK plugin, and XFCE4 XKB plugin. I don't know what most of these do. Haven't had a chance to look into them. Sounds like a lot of things that don't work yet. Maybe you can get by without them. I don't know. But the XFCE devs say, quote, so far, XFCE does not feature a compositor which supports Wayland. If you want to run XFCE in Wayland, LabWC or Wayfire will give you the best results. Plans are underway to add Wayland support to XFWM4 while preserving its existing X11 functionality. However, such a restructurization will be a major effort, and we cannot tell yet when/if it will be done. So please don't hold your breath. You got another couple of years for the next release, and then there'll be a little more there in a couple more years, and we'll see. Other changes included in this, there's support for SVG wallpapers on large screens, support for setting custom colors for icon labels and icon backgrounds, a new option to store folders before files, enhanced context menus, support for configuring all XF desktop shortcuts. Thunar XFC's file manager received support for IPv6 remote URLs, along with other improvements, new toolbar, buttons, search improvements. Like I always say, I'm still holding out for IPv8. There's also more configuration options for the panel, launcher improvements, better support for handling dark themes, which many people love, and many more. The desktop environment, that rarely changes, is improving. And if all goes well, hopefully XFCE will be fully Wayland ready in a few years or so. Just in time to finally deprecate X. So if you're looking to get your hands on a new XFCE 4.20 desktop environment, Slackware-based Porto 1.8, spelled, because I don't really know how to say it. I even looked on Google how to say it, and it sounds French, and I can't. It was tough for me. So it's spelled Porteux, and the X is capital. So I don't know if that means it's Porto X or if it's Portox, or I don't know. So that's how it is. That's what it is. It's a Slackware based Slackware not known to be one of the easier ones, so it's probably not one of the easier desktops for people new or who just want something easy. I don't know, but it is one of the first to ship with XFCE 4.20. But within the next couple release cycles, just around the corner, we'll likely see 4.20 coming in many other more mainstream distros in the next few months.
420 is one of those interesting numbers. I just can't help but notice.
Were you giggling every time I said it?
Sort of, yeah.
420. I mean, it really made me think of X and Elon Musk also, but
yes, that's why I found it really
just all tied together.
Yep.
Yes.
Time is.
I was totally expecting you at some point to say that it will have Wayland finalized just in time to start deprecating Wayland.
Yeah.
I thought that's where you were going to.
I have much higher hopes than that. Just because
X lasted for a long time. You hope Wayland will for a few more years.
Oh, I know. The point is not that Wayland's on the way out. The point is that XFCE moves so slowly.
I just have higher hopes, wishful thinking maybe, because X needs to go and Wayland needs to take the lead.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Indeed. Interesting stuff. All right, shall we move into some command line tips? I think it's time.
Let's do it.
All right, Jeff is up first with COM.
Yeah, so today's command line tip, and it's actually a command line tip, is the COM command, COMM. So this command allows you to compare two sorted files, that's an important detail, sorted, line by line, identifying lines that are unique to each file and those that are common to both. And this is particularly useful if you have lists or log data you need to compare. So this is a little different than, like, say, diff or something like that. So the COM command performs a line-by-line comparison and by default generates a 3-column output. So column 1 contains lines unique to the first file, column 2 contains lines unique to the second file, and column 3 contains lines common to both files. Now, if you look at the example in the show notes, there's a nice article in there about using it, but and the 3-column format should be easy to visualize because it's just 3 columns. Now, most commonly used options for this command are a -1, a -2, or a -3, or it can be and -3. So these options simply suppress what you specify. So for example, using -1 with the command will suppress the first column. You can use more than one of these options at the same time. For example, using 1 and 2 together will suppress both the first and second columns, leaving you with only the lines that are common to both files. Conversely, using -1 and -3 will show you only what is unique to the second file. There are other switches you can use with COM as well, but they're not really that common. I mean, that wasn't trying to make a pun there, but it's just the -1, 2, and 3 are kind of the most used ones. Take a look at the link in the show notes or consult your man page, man space COMM, to learn more about this useful command.
All right. Very good. Let's see. Up next is David talking about expansion, bash expansion. David is muted. We cannot hear you, David.
Yes, I am. So let me pop over here. All right. So I am confident that bash expansion has been talked about before, but it has been a long time ago. And as we often mention on here, while we sometimes find brand new command line tips, also sometimes we either have to deal with a problem or get bit by something. And I got bit by bash command line expansion, specifically dot versus asterisk. So I'm going to explain why that's a big deal. So I created a example directory here, and if I do an ls, I see I've got a dir1 in a file, but if I do an ls -a, which is going to show everything, we can see I have some hidden objects here. I have a hidden.dir2 and a hidden.file. So what was happening was I was trying to locate some contents in a file using grep. So we've talked about grep in the past. I'm going to use grep in this example, but I'm not going to explain it. But it lets you search inside the files, and you can give a -R for recursive searching. So if I grep ZZ, if I grep ZZ in the current files, it's going to tell me that dir1 is a directory and file contains ZZ. Now, if I add -R like this, that's going to tell it recursive. So now it's going to actually go down into dir1, and it's going to tell me that inside dir1, there are two files, a file which has ZZ and .file, which is a hidden file, which also contains ZZ, and then my file ZZ. But it's missing the entire .dir2 folder. So if I change that asterisk to a dot, now it's going to search in the current directory instead of enumerating what it can see. And now it'll give me all of the examples. But if you notice, whereas before it said dir1/file, dir1/.file, file, now it's saying ./ and then that same information, but it also has the hidden dir2. The reason for that is because the dot says search in the current directory, but the asterisk is just doing the same thing as a basic ls, and it is saying here's dir1 and here's file, and we can actually see that by echoing the asterisk, which will give you the same results as doing just an ls. So it's not a big thing, but it was something that bit me because when I was in a subdirectory, I was getting a different result than when I was in a root directory, and I realized what it was the directory I was changing in and out of was hidden, and it wasn't showing up, and I was like, forehead smack, and I was like, hey, I'll share this, have a good laugh at myself, and just remind everybody that, sometimes these things matter.
Indeed.
I've always just been using all that with /, but I suppose that / is unnecessary.
Just one extra keystroke, but you don't need.
And I've never
save the keystrokes.
I've never even thought to use the asterisks, but now that you've taught me the difference here, and also that I don't need that extra keystroke, that'll save me lots of seconds that will add up over the years.
Yeah, lot of RSI saved as well.
Yes.
All right, Jeff has been in contact with the FBI apparently.
What? That's not Jeff's.
Is that not Jeff?
Yeah, I'm like,
wait. Rob has been in contact with the FBI. Sorry, I was trying not to blow your cover, Rob.
And that is much less surprising.
yeah.
All right, let's show my screen here, because this is a command line tip, and you all viewers need to see this one because it's a visual one. Even though it's command line, it's visual. So FBI is frame buffer image. It's a frame buffer image viewer is what FBI is. So right here, those watching, this is on an Ubuntu server. No GUI, no desktop environment, just Ubuntu server. It's a VM, but what you're seeing here is the equivalent of just a TTY if you had a monitor attached with no GUI, and it just boots up into your command line. So FBI, if I type let me type that on the right screen here. Put my cursor over here, FBI. And then -T1, that's the TTY. So you can have it show on TTY 1, 2, 3, whatever you have there. And then I'm going to put a -A is going to auto zoom to fit. So it's gonna make the image fit the screen. Then I'm going to do a -T space 3, which is -T, and the 3 is seconds. So it's for a continuous slideshow. And then I've selected two files that are in the directory that I'm in. And you do have to use sudo from what I've noticed, because it needs access to the TTY. Maybe there's some other way around it. So I have sudo space FBI space -T space 1 space -A space -T space 3 space uls.jpg space robertcampbell.jpg. So I don't need to have all those, but I'm going to show you a bunch of different commands here. They're flags that you can add onto this. And so you could use this. So if maybe you want to just do a screensaver and you don't want to, you have like a screen, a Raspberry Pi attached to it. All you want to do is have a slideshow. That's what I meant to say. You don't need a full GUI for this. You don't need a full GUI for this. It will do it right in the frame buffer. Now that's a really small picture, so that's why the picture of me is blurry. But yeah, you don't need to install a GUI. This will that's all you need is just a basic Linux install, and you can do a slideshow. Now I removed the -A, so now it's not zooming in. That's how small the picture originally is. There's more details on the bottom. You can't necessarily see the image is behind me, the image name. Way over on the right, it's the size 100%. And then it has the actual size. The Untitled Linux Show is 600 by 600. The second image is 150 by 202. And there is an H for help, but you just escape out of that. So you could have it just boot up into that and easily have a slideshow or whatever other purpose. Maybe it's a headless machine, but for some reason you have a monitor on it and you want to just boot up some logo, or I don't know what you want. But you could have images in the frame buffer without X or Wayland or any GUI on there.
Frame buffer interface. I like it.
Interface. There we go. That's what the I is.
Yes. All right. So my tip is one I actually used this, not this week, a couple of weeks ago. It's ABCDE or ABCDE, and that is a better CD encoder. And this is a really simple CD audio ripper for the command line. And for most uses, you just go to the folder you want and you can just run ABCDE and it will go out and find your CD drive, rip it. I think it goes to FLAC or MP3 by default, I think. But there's all kinds of flags you can give it to tell exactly how you want it to do it. But yeah, it just, for me at least, it just works. And I had a CD and I needed to get the audio off of it. I've got a link to their main page, which has links off to documentation about how to do things. It is pretty simple though, and from what I can tell, ABCD is installable from the repositories in most of the major distros. I know it's in Fedora, and it appears to be in Ubuntu as well. So if you need a simple command line CD ripper, there you go. Fun stuff. All right, we have made it through the show, and I want to give the guys, each of them, a chance to plug whatever they want to, and or if they want to get the last word on something. We'll start with Rob, and he is asking for a whole lot of coffee.
Lots of coffee. I'm thirsty, guys. All right, as always, you can come connect with me. Find my links at robertpcampbell.com. On there, there's links to my LinkedIn, my Twitter, my Mastodon. I'll get Blue Sky up there someday. And here's the important one, where you can click on this little coffee cup to donate me coffees. Sean recently donated 10 coffees, so that way I would have to use Linux Mint for 2 months, as I said on a previous show. And I'm not sure if he's the same Sean, but if you guys remember, there was a Sean that donated coffees to everybody and then donated coffees to me when I felt sad because he didn't donate them to me. So I don't know if it's the same Sean or another Sean. Maybe it says if I click in, but Sean's are good guys. So
shaking Sean down for coffee money.
Thanks for this coffee, Sean. Or Sean or Sean's. I don't know.
All right, David.
So to be slightly serious, but also, not to be depressing or anything, but this time of year can be uncomfortable for some people. That you can be going through stuff, and I only mention this because I've had this situation myself in the past, and so I'm very aware of it. So if you're listening to this and this just isn't the best season for you, just know that there are people that care for you, that you are important, and reach out to a friend to find some support structure to be around you. But you're important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Jeff.
You can find me on LinkedIn and Mastodon. Just go find Rob, and then I'm connected to him in there. That'll work. But more importantly, for this last show of the year, so we got to make a good one. Poetry Corner. This has got to tide you over for a week or 2 weeks. Roses are red. My server is gray. I'm a computer nerd. Don't expect me to rhyme. Have a great week and a great holiday, everybody.
So to be clear, to find Jeff, you go to robertpcampbell.com, click on LinkedIn, which was the far right one as you look at the screen. Click on that, search for Jeff Massie, and you'll be there.
That's hilarious.
Technically, you should be able to find me that way too.
Oh, right. David Ruggles is there too.
Yeah, we're all at 1 degree of Rob.
There's the show title.
Oh, all right. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We will not be having a ULS next week. That is the Saturday between Christmas and New Year's. We're taking the day off. I think all of TWiT is taking that time period off and get some much needed rest and relaxation. If you are a Floss Weekly listener, we are taking a couple of weeks off there as well. We will actually be back on Floss on the 31st to talk about FR routing, which is a really cool project doing some deep internet routing stuff. And I don't know, maybe I can talk Rob into coming with me to be the co-host on that one. We'll see. But that's what's there. And then you can follow my work over at Hackaday on not only Floss Weekly, but also the security column. We didn't run one this Friday, not because of the holidays, but because I was sick as a dog on Thursday. I spent all day out here staring at my computer, trying to write security article, but just I had the brain fog too bad. I couldn't do it. We should be back next week for that as well. But yeah, you can follow me there, and appreciate the guys being here for the show today. And we appreciate everybody that watches and listens, both to get us live and on the download. We will see you in 2 weeks on the Untitled Linux Show. Thanks.